I spent the morning going back through exactly what Marco Rubio said about Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. And the more I read, the clearer it got that this wasn't just a routine warning. Let me walk you through what he actually said and what it means. Quick thing before we get into it. Drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. So there's this narrow stretch of water called the Strait of Hormuz. And if you've never heard of it, honestly, you're not alone. Most Americans couldn't find it on a map. I couldn't have maybe a year ago. But here's what you need to know. About 20% of the world's oil moves through that strait every single day. 20%. That's not a detail. That's not a footnote. That's the lifeblood of the global economy, squeezed through a channel that's only about 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. And yesterday, our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, stood in front of reporters and said something that should have set off alarm bells in every boardroom from Houston to Beijing. He said Iran is using that strait as leverage against the entire world. Now, let me be real with you. Rubio was speaking before a trip to the Philippines. He was headed to an ASEAN foreign ministers meeting, which is basically a gathering of Southeast Asian nations. And the reporters asked him about the Middle East, about the ongoing conflict, about Iran. And he didn't give them a canned diplomatic answer. He gave them something raw. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but this is close, that some in Iran want to control the straits and hold that as leverage against the world. Not against America, against the world. Think about the weight of that word. Leverage. That's not posturing. That's not saber rattling. That's a strategic admission that Iran sees itself as holding a gun to the head of global trade. And what's worse? He said the United States will continue protecting global shipping there. But he also said other countries need to step up. Hardware, financing. Those were his words. He's telling NATO allies. He's telling Japan and South Korea. He's telling every nation that depends on that oil, you need to put your money where your mouth is, because the U.S. can't keep carrying this alone. Now ask yourself this. Why would he say that out loud? Why would a Secretary of State on the record admit that American power has limits? That's not something you just toss out there casually. That's a signal. That's a warning. That's the U.S. government telling the world we are stretched thin, and Iran knows it. You need to understand what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now, because it's not just Iran making threats, it's Iran making moves. They've been seizing ships. They've been harassing commercial vessels. They've been conducting military exercises in the strait. And every single time they do it, oil prices twitch. Insurance rates for shipping go up. The global economy shudders. And Rubio's point, the one he was making yesterday, it's that Iran has figured out a dark, cynical truth. They don't need to build nuclear weapons to threaten the world. They don't need long-range missiles. All they need is that 33-kilometer wide bottleneck. Because if they can't sell their oil, they can make sure nobody else can either. Now let's go back a bit. Let me explain how we got here, because this didn't happen overnight. For years, the U.S. had a military presence in the Gulf that basically guaranteed freedom of navigation. The Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, was like a highway patrol for the entire region. Ships moved through, Iran watched, everyone grumbled, and business went on. But that's been changing. And the change has been faster than most people realize. Under the last administration, there was a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. Sanctions, economic isolation, the whole works. Iran's economy got crushed. And when you crush an economy like that, you create desperation. And when you have desperation, you get exactly what we're seeing now. A regime that doesn't have much to lose. A regime that's willing to play with fire because the alternative is collapse. And then October 7th happened, and the whole Middle East went up in flames. And Iran saw its proxy networks, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, suddenly more active than they'd been in years. The Houthis started firing missiles at ships in the Red Sea. Hezbollah started launching rockets into Israel. And somewhere in Tehran, somebody said, wait a minute, what if we do the same thing in the Gulf? What if we just block it? Let me say something that might be uncomfortable. Iran knows the U.S. doesn't want another war. We're exhausted. The American people are exhausted. We've been in the Middle East for 2 decades. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, the list goes on. And every president since Bush has tried to wind down that commitment. Trump tried. Biden tried. And now we have this administration, and they're trying too. But the problem is, the world still needs that oil to flow. And someone has to enforce that. Rubio basically admitted yesterday that enforcement is getting harder. He said other countries need to provide hardware and financing. He's basically saying, look, we're putting ships in the water, we're putting sailors at risk, but we're not doing it alone anymore. And that's a message that's been coming for a long time, but hearing it out loud, it lands differently. So let's talk about the turning point. Because there was a moment in that press conference. Rubio was asked if the U.S. had seen any increase in Iranian activity in the Strait. And he paused. He didn't deny it. He didn't deflect. He said, and I'm going to quote this carefully because it matters. He said, I don't want to get into operational details from this podium. But then he added, I think it's fair to say that their intent is to use that as leverage. That was the moment. That was the admission. He didn't say there's no threat. He didn't say we have it under control. He said their intent is to use the Strait as leverage. That's the Secretary of State acknowledging that Iran has a strategy, and that strategy is working. And the way he said it, the way he almost hesitated before answering, it told me he wasn't comfortable with where things are heading. Here's what I think he wanted to say but couldn't. I think he wanted to tell everyone that the U.S. military is overextended. I think he wanted to say that China is watching this and smiling. I think he wanted to admit that Iran has called our bluff. Because what happens if Iran actually closes the strait? What happens if they mine it? What happens if they start sinking ships? Do we go to war? Does anyone actually believe we want that? Nobody wants that. And Iran knows it. And this is where it gets truly worrying. Because once a regime figures out your red lines aren't really red, once they realize you'll sanction and protest, but you won't go to war, they push further. That's how asymmetric warfare works. That's how the weak exploit the strong. Iran doesn't need to win a war. They just need to prove they can disrupt global oil supplies enough to make everyone else panic. And if oil spikes to $150 a barrel, if gas hits $6, $7, $8 a gallon in America, that's leverage. That's exactly what Rubio is talking about. Now let me walk you through the reactions, because this is where things get really interesting. Wall Street, they heard this, and oil went up. Not dramatically, not yet, but it went up, because the market is always listening for that word, leverage. When a Secretary of State uses that word to describe Iran's strategy, the algorithms notice. They don't care about politics. They care about supply chains. And the Strait of Hormuz is the biggest supply chain choke point on Earth. And out in the Gulf, the navies are watching each other more closely. The U.S. has been escorting commercial ships through the strait. But that takes resources. That takes ships, people, time. And every time an American destroyer escorts a tanker through, it's one less ship available for something else. South China Sea, Mediterranean, Pacific. We are pulled in every direction. And Iran is exploiting that. Now ask yourself, who else is listening? China imports something like 70% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. 70%. That's not a detail. That's a vulnerability. And the Chinese know it. They've been building military bases in Djibouti, expanding their naval presence in the Indian Ocean, watching everything we do. Because they know if Iran ever actually closes that strait, China is in trouble. And if China is in trouble, the whole global economy is in trouble. So you've got the U.S. saying, we're still protecting the strait. But you've also got the U.S. saying, everybody else needs to chip in. And that's where the tension lives. Because the other nations, Europe, Japan, South Korea, India, they like the U.S. providing the security without them having to pay for it. It's like having a neighborhood watch that one guy pays for. Great for everyone else. Not so great for the guy footing the bill. Rubio is basically telling them the free ride is over. And he's saying it ahead of this trip to the Philippines. That's not an accident. He's going to ASEAN. He's going to sit down with 10 foreign ministers from Southeast Asia, and he's going to look them in the eye and say, Iran is threatening the strait. We need your help. Hardware, financing, send something, or don't complain when things get worse. Now let's think about what happens if other countries say no. If they say, sorry, Marco, we can't afford it. Or if they say, we don't want to get involved in a conflict. Then what? What does the U.S. do then? Does it pull back? Does it say, fine, we'll protect the strait anyway because we have to? That's the trap. That's the leverage Iran is counting on. Because if the U.S. protects the strait alone, it's a massive cost. But if the U.S. doesn't protect the strait, the global economy takes a hit, and America gets blamed either way. And here's the thing that Rubio understands that maybe you've already figured out. Iran doesn't have to close the strait. They just have to make everyone believe they might. That's leverage. That's the entire point. They can keep everyone guessing. They can seize one ship here, harass another tanker there, and every time they do, insurance rates go up, oil prices spike, and the world gets a little more nervous. And in that nervousness, Iran gets what it wants: attention, fear, power. So what does this mean for you? Honestly, it means gas prices are vulnerable. It means the price of everything you buy that's shipped across oceans could go up. It means the global economy is sitting on a powder keg, and Iran is holding the match. And our Secretary of State just told the world, with as much clarity as a diplomat can muster, that he knows it. He knows they're doing it, and he's not sure he can stop it alone. Now look, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying we're heading for war. I'm not saying Iran is going to close the strait tomorrow. What I am saying is that the balance of power in the Gulf has shifted. And Rubio's words yesterday were the clearest signal yet that the U.S. recognizes that shift. But recognizing a problem and solving a problem are two very different things. And this is where I get genuinely worried. Because when you look at the track record, when you look at the warnings we've ignored in the past, when you look at how many times intelligence agencies said Iran is getting closer to a nuclear breakout, or Iran is testing its missile capabilities, and we sort of shrugged and moved on. This feels like one of those moments we're going to look back on and say, why didn't we take that seriously? Let's talk about what Rubio didn't say, because that's just as important. He didn't say, we have a plan to stop them. He didn't say, we're reinforcing our presence in the Gulf. He didn't say, Iran will pay a price. He didn't say any of the tough, swaggering language we've heard from previous administrations. And that's what makes this so unsettling. The absence of that bravado, the absence of that don't worry, we've got this energy. He seemed almost resigned, like he was explaining a reality he didn't like but couldn't change. And that's not Marco Rubio. I mean, the guy is not known for being passive. He's a former critic of the Iran deal. He's been hawkish on Iran for years. So hearing him talk about burden sharing and asking other countries to chip in, it felt like a white flag. Not a white flag of surrender, but a white flag of frustration. Like he's tired of being the only one who seems to care. And that matters, because if the United States is tired, if our diplomats are tired, if our military is overstretched, Iran is going to keep pushing. They have to. That's how leverage works. The more you push, the more you gain, until someone pushes back hard enough to stop you. And right now, I don't see that pushback coming. I see hand-wringing, I see meetings, I see statements, but I don't see the kind of overwhelming force that says, Iran, don't even think about it. So what happens if Iran does decide to escalate? What happens if they mine the strait? What happens if they sink a U.S. naval vessel? Those are the nightmare scenarios. Those are the things that start wars. And the fact that our Secretary of State is talking about leverage, not about deterrence, suggests he knows those scenarios are not as remote as we'd like them to be. He knows the window is closing, and he's desperate to get other countries involved before it's too late. Now, there's another layer here that I haven't mentioned yet, and this is the one that really keeps me up at night. Because if Iran is using the Strait of Hormuz as leverage, what else are they going to do? The strait is just one tool in their box. They've also got cyber capabilities. They've got missiles. They've got proxies all over the region. And every time they demonstrate that they can hurt the global economy, they gain credibility. They gain respect. They gain leverage. And the worst part, this is going to make the nuclear negotiations even harder, because now Iran has two pieces of leverage. They have the nuclear program and they have the strait. The more leverage they have, the more they can demand. And the more they demand, the harder it is to reach any kind of deal. So we're trapped in a downward spiral. More leverage for Iran means less leverage for the U.S. And less leverage for the U.S. means more instability. And more instability means the whole region gets more dangerous. Let me tell you what I think Rubio was really saying yesterday. I think he was saying, we need help. The U.S. cannot be the world's policeman anymore. The era of American dominance in the Gulf is ending. And if other nations don't step up, we are all going to pay the price. That's not a threat. That's not a negotiation tactic. That's the truth. And Rubio said it out loud. And I think that was the bravest thing he could have done, because admitting weakness is harder than pretending to be strong. But here's the question that's been eating at me since I heard his words. And I want to put this to you. If Iran can hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, what's to stop them from holding other choke points hostage? The Strait of Malacca? The Suez Canal? The Bab el-Mandeb? They've already threatened some of those. They've already made moves in the Red Sea. So if this strategy works, what stops them from expanding it? What stops them from disrupting global trade in multiple places at once? That's not a future threat. That's a present one. And I'll tell you one more thing. This is going to get quiet. The mainstream media, they'll move on to something else. A celebrity scandal, a sports story, a domestic political fight. And this this whole thing will slip out of the headlines. But the threat won't go away. The ships will still be in the water. The Iranians will still be watching. And the leverage will still be there. And one day, maybe soon, someone will pull that trigger. And we'll all wonder why we didn't see it coming. So what do? What does anyone do? I'm not a policymaker. I'm not a military strategist. But I know that ignoring this, pretending it's just another diplomatic spat, that's not an option. Because Rubio just told us in plain English that Iran is weaponizing global commerce. And the U.S. is asking for backup. That's not spin. That's not hyperbole. That's what happened. And here's what I want you to walk away with. This isn't about political parties. It's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about whether the global order that has existed since World War II, the order built on free movement of ships and goods, whether that order is going to survive. Because if Iran can hold the Strait hostage, if they can make the world economy tremble, then the era of globalization might be over. And that's not an exaggeration. That's the stakes. One more thing before I let you go, and this is the haunting part. Rubio mentioned that Iran wants to hold this leverage against the world, not against America, not against Europe, against the world. So everyone is a target. Everyone is vulnerable. And that's not something any of us can ignore. Because if the world is the target, then the world has to respond. But will it? Or will we wait until it's too late? Just like we always do. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. But I know that Marco Rubio, whether you agree with him or not, tried to tell us something important yesterday. And I think we owe it to ourselves to listen, really listen, not just hear the news and scroll past it, but sit with it. Think about what it means. Because this isn't over. This is just the beginning. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I know it was a lot. But sometimes the most important stuff isn't the easiest to talk about. Drop a comment if you're still here. Tell me your thoughts, where you're watching from, what you make of all this. I'm genuinely curious. And subscribe if you want to keep following this with me, because I'm not stopping. And honestly, neither should you.